Hello and welcome to Lunchtime Agenda. I'm Laura Jays, and as we go to air today, Cabinet is considering sweeping new anti-terrorism laws, which would include reversing the onus of proof for anyone travelling to conflict zones. In the future, Australians who travel to places like Iraq or Syria might have to prove upon their return that they weren't involved in terrorism. The government is also considering using advanced powers to suspend passports at short notice to stop would-be jihadists at the border. But perhaps more immediately, the National Security Committee has already signed off on controversial mandatory data retention laws. Under the plan, metadata, that is internet and phone records, not content, would be kept for 2 years. Not everyone is comfortable with the idea, though.
I do understand the arguments that have been put forward by the Australian Federal Police, by ASIO, by other agencies. But equally, I understand the concerns that very many Australians have about mandatory data retention. I certainly say that we shouldn't be proceeding without very long public consultation and clarity about the safeguards that the government's proposing.
As a matter of principle, from my perspective, not the right approach to have mass surveillance of the population. Ultimately, though, there may be safeguards that are being looked at, safeguards that might be put in place, safeguards that protect privacy, while at the same time providing our enforcement agencies the tools that they need to undertake their job. But again, this is all speculation. As I understand it, no decision's been made. It's something that's being looked at, and no doubt this will be an ongoing discussion.
Joining me now is Parliamentary Secretary to the Shadow Attorney-General Graham Perrett and Liberal MP Michael Sukkar. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me. Michael, first to you. We heard...
Hi, Laura. Hi, Graham.
Hi. We heard reservations there expressed from both the Shadow Attorney-General and Liberal frontbencher Steve Ciobo. Michael, do you share any of those concerns?
Look, I think the first thing to state is that no final announcement has been made on certainly the retention of metadata. I mean, the Attorney-General and Prime Minister have said that a review of all of our national security legislation and supporting law enforcement framework is being reviewed. The one point to make in relation to the retention of metadata, and I do concede and I do appreciate the concerns that people have expressed. I think all reasonable people hold those reservations, but metadata is already available to our law enforcement agencies. So this isn't a question about giving additional access to our law enforcement and national security agencies. It's really a question about storing data that's already available that are used quite properly to protect Australians in an environment where, unfortunately, new threats are posing themselves on a daily basis.
Well, Michael, if that's the case, do civil libertarians have nothing to worry about then when it comes to data retention?
Look, there's always a tension here, Laura, as you would know, and Graham I'm sure would appreciate. There's a tension between ensuring that we respect people's civil liberties and do our job as a government, and that is to protect our citizens. So I'm not going to pretend that it's an easy answer. There's no doubt that there will be some tension between where we ultimately end up, but provided there are appropriate safeguards, I think most reasonable people would accept that for the betterment of security of Australian people, that it might be a good way to go. Having said that, let's see what the final announcement is. The Attorney-General certainly said it's being actively considered.
Yeah, we should see that some kind of announcement this afternoon. But Graham Perrett, the safeguards, the balance here is going to be the important detail that we will look at. What safeguards would you like to see in place?
As Michael and Stephen Chodler and Mark Dreyfus have said, it is the safeguards and the oversight. And obviously, as a parliamentarian, I have a lot of faith in the committee system. I'm on committees with Michael. I think our committees do a great job. So the appropriate parliamentary committee should be informed, and obviously we should also inform the Australian public. So, you know, a long consultation, make sure that the Australian people know what will be looked at and what will be retained, and also who will...
What should the safeguards aim to do? Should it aim to prevent an Edward Snowden type situation where someone within our spy agencies have access to that kind of data, or is it more making sure that data isn't retained that shouldn't be?
Look, It is a case of getting safety first, but you don't want liberties, you know, those Australian values that are so important to us, to be thrown out in the process of making people safe, because then you actually destroy the very institution that, you know, terrorists might be inclined to attack. So obviously parliamentary oversight is a big part of it. There are also public safeguards there. The National Commissioner who's able to overlook the intelligence organisations to make sure that any information that is gathered is looked at appropriately. We've already seen that even in healthy democracies like the United States, Big Brother, motivated by the best of intentions, but can sometimes go a bit too far because of the blinkers they have on when it comes to protecting people from terrorist attacks.
Let me look at the reverse onus of proof idea in these terrorism laws, something that is being considered by Cabinet at the moment. Michael Sukkar, this is a very difficult area, isn't it? Asking someone who may have been to Syria or Iraq to visit their family, if they come back to Australia, they have to prove that they haven't been involved in terrorism.
Hey, look, again, Laura, I think that no final decision's been made. But what I would say is here, clearly there are varying, depending on which agency you may listen to, and there are independent commentators, there may be anywhere between 60 and 100 Australians fighting overseas at the moment. Now, it's very difficult for, under our onus of proof in Australia, to determine what exactly they were doing. We don't have law enforcement in the ground or on the ground in Syria or Iraq. So it is very difficult to prove what our national security agencies may have very well-founded fears of, that those Australian citizens or residents were fighting for abominable groups overseas. So I again think that there'd need to be appropriate, certainly an appropriate consultation process involved, but instinctively I think the protection of Australian citizens and the protection of this insidious new problem that we have of Australian citizens and residents being radicalised even more so, and dangerously learning new techniques on how to kill and maim. Well, I view my primary obligation as an MP is to protect Australian citizens
Graham Perrett,
first and foremost.
How do you feel about the reverse onus of proof?
Well, certainly, you know, Law School 101, no lawyer is in favour of the reverse onus of proof. That's the starting principle. But the reality is, it is in our tax laws, our building commissions have used it. Like it is peppered throughout various bits of legislation. But again, I come back to the motivation and the consultation and the oversight of that reverse onus of proof. And certainly, my understanding is if there's not a lot of direct flights from Syria to Brisbane, so how we're actually going to utilise such legislation and do it effectively would be one of my questions. And as Michael said, I actually don't think it's a new thing. Australians, we're celebrating, commemorating the start of World War I when nearly 1 in 12 Australians went off to fight for their nation. We've got a long history of people going overseas to fight for causes based on culture, religion, for money, for faith, for family, all sorts of reasons. So
Graham, you cannot compare.
So Michael, you don't want one rule that just says every single person that comes from an area of conflict should be judged a criminal.
Okay,
I'm wary of that.
Graham,
we will keep
sorry,
a close
Laura,
eye on that.
I can't let that go. Graham, you cannot compare Australians who went over to World War I to fight for Australian values
I said we have a long
current
history
Australian
of people
citizens
going overseas to fight,
who may be in Iraq or Syria fighting for terrorist organisations.
Okay, quickly
I'm not sure if you meant to do that, but I don't think it's good to equate the two. Sorry, Laura.
Okay, I quickly want to look at two more issues.
Just completely different things, Michael.
Quickly, looking at the NBN report, do you now concede that Labor could have rolled out this signature policy much better than it did?
Look, a piece of massive infrastructure like this, that will be such a even the half-baked version that Michael and his party are rolling out will be a massive boost to productivity. So look, in hindsight, there are things we might have done differently. I'm a bit wary of a report written by this gentleman from Telstra. It'd be like, you know, me doing a review into why Tony Abbott's done so poorly since the election. You know, the report might be accurate, but you'd be wary of my motivations for writing it.
Michael Sukkar, your response?
Well, I don't think anyone in the industry is questioning the integrity of the report. I mean, the reality is this report highlights and really concludes that were Labor to be re-elected in 2013, the NBN project would have ran 4 years over time, cost $29 billion more than what the Labor Party told us, and average residents would be paying $43 a month more for their internet. So the Communications Minister's done an outstanding job thus far to try and rescue what was a very flawed process. The report indicates that it was 11 weeks from when it was a thought bubble in Stephen Conroy's mind to the policy being announced. Yep. And contractors on the project had to determine their scope of work based on public media releases.
We will have a reply from Stephen Conroy in a moment, but just quickly and finally to you, Michael Sukkar, I want to ask you about the paid parental leave scheme. It seems there is a growing foreboding for the PPL. Do you see that this will be very difficult for the government to carry through with?
I think ultimately we will get the policy through. We took it to 2 elections. I'm a bit concerned that the debate has almost degenerated now, particularly from those on the Labor side, to knocking PPL, knocking the very basis of PPL. Every single Australian mother who qualifies under our PPL scheme will be better off than what they are at present. There is a whole range of productivity and social benefits that we think this scheme will provide. So I'm a bit concerned with how far it's degenerated. And you know, the question for Graham and the Labor Party is, if they hate our PPL scheme so much, are they going to introduce legislation to roll it back for public servants?
Graham, Perrett, I wish I could give you the right of reply there, but there'll be other opportunities.
We brought in a scheme, it's extant and continues. Well done, Labor.
Graham, Perrett, Michael Sukkar, thanks so much for joining us. A quick break here in Lunchtime Agenda.